About how this ceasefire, the Houthi rebels agreeing to hold their fire on Saudi coalition forces, how that might in fact deliver relief to the residents there.
Yes, I mean, this is a big step in terms of it's something that the Saudis, the Saudi-led coalition had said would be a precondition for any sort of conversation. And it's also an explicit step that Martin Griffith, the special envoy for the United Nations, had said needed to be met in order for the process to move forward. So what this does is we've seen over the last week or so, after the United States pulled its in-flight refueling for the Saudi-led coalition, we saw a reduction in military activity in and around the port of Haditha. And now with this next step, we're beginning to see some hope that there might be a broader cessation of hostilities, as we expect the Brits to call for in the new Security Council resolution that's being tabled today, in the next couple of days. We may not get to a full cessation of hostilities, but we're beginning to see a glide path to what that would look like.
Certainly, and we saw in a report from our senior Middle East correspondent just moments ago, just how dire the conditions are that these residents are living in, eating leaves. That's where it's come to. How far away is the road to recovery?
I mean, before we can even talk about recovery, we've got to talk about trying to stave off what could be the worst famine in a generation. I mean, we're talking of something of biblical proportions. If there are an estimated 14, if not more, million Yemenis who are food insecure, bordering on famine, it's going to take a lot of very quick action, both by humanitarians who need access to the port in Haditha, as well as some additional steps that we expect to be outlined in the resolution that the Brits have put forward that need to be taken immediately. Another key step that's going to be important, in addition to opening up access to Haditha to allow really big humanitarian assistance to flow through, will also be an injection of cash going into the central bank in Yemen, which pays salaries and will give people the ability, some liquidity, to begin to buy food again. So we're not even yet at the point of talking about recovery. We're just trying to stave off what is already the world's worst humanitarian crisis from getting worse.
It's certainly very hard to watch, just those images playing on the screen now. Hardin, stay with us. Moving back into studio, back to you, Mohammad. Now, Yemen is, of course, the battlefield for a proxy war against Iran. What does this mean, this ceasefire, in terms of curbing the threat that is Iran inside of Yemen? What kind of a security impact did this have?
Well, it won't have an immediate impact on the influence of Iran there. Iran keeps denying that it even provides weapons to the Houthis, but the Houthis have no other source of weapons but the Iranians and maybe Hezbollah also in Lebanon. Right now, this means maybe it could stop the bleeding, could stop the the weapons coming into Yemen from both sides, not just the Iranians, but maybe even the Saudis supporting the legitimate and internationally recognized government. I think the most important issue right now is to make sure that enough clean water, medicine, desperately needed humanitarian aid must come into the country. And I do believe that with both sides agreeing, or even three sides, because we have the Saudis or the Saudi-led coalition, which is made of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates mainly, and then the Houthis agreeing, as well as the Yemeni government agreeing very quickly, by the way. I mean, the Houthis came out last night saying that we will halt and suspend all military hostilities, as well as launching or firing of missiles towards Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Not even 12 hours later, we've seen a reaction or a response from the Yemeni government. What does that tell us? That all sides are interested and eager to find a political solution to the conflict. It may take a long time before we reach that, but at least this will stop the suffering of civilians, of these children that have been in very desperate need of humanitarian aid.
All right, back to you, Hardin, in Washington, D.C. We've been talking about the fact that it was, in fact, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi that allowed for some real pressure to be put on all the parties involved here in the war in Yemen. Now, the US government is yet to make its own conclusion around the death of Khashoggi. In your assessment, is the US doing enough to rein in Saudi Arabia around its human rights abuses?
Look, I mean, I think that everyone sort of in the human rights and humanitarian community was quite pleased to see or welcomed the move last week, a little bit before, to cut off in-flight refueling for the Saudi-led coalition in response to the uptick in military activity that we had seen around the port city of Haditha. So for us, I mean, I think for everyone, that was a good first step. The question is, there's a lot more that needs to be done. The United States still maintains tremendous leverage over Saudi Arabia in any potential talks, particularly with respect to logistic support and intelligence that's being provided for the war in Yemen. What we need to see now is a cessation of hostilities and U.S. diplomacy pushing quite hard in direction of turning that cessation into something that's a lasting peace. There is no doubt that the politics around Saudi Arabia and the war in Yemen have been changing for some time in Washington, D.C., and the murder of the journalist certainly accelerated that trend and made it more possible for this to move forward. But I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that very urgent action and additional measures are needed right away if we're going to avert this threat of massive famine throughout the country.
All right, Hardin Lang, appreciate that insight.